During the French Revolution, the execution of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette shocked Europe. Many in France feared invasion because the people executed their monarchy, but after there was a regime in place known as a Reign of Terror. This was a fearsome time, in which anyone who said a word of dissent against the revolution, or did one small action that was interpreted as dissenting, would lead to execution. Maximilien Robespierre led this, but he too would be taken to the guillotine, along with thousands of other people in France. But one forgotten member of the French royal family who was executed was the sister of the king, Elizabeth of France. She was a French princess, and at the same place that her brother lost his head, she also too would be executed on the guillotine. But what is the story of her horrific execution? Remember as always to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Elizabeth was born on the 3rd of May 1764 and was the youngest child of Louis, the Dauphin of France. Her grandparents were King Louis XV and Queen Maria, but following the sudden death of her father in 1765, Elizabeth's older brother Louis became the Dauphin and the heir apparent. Their mother died in 1767, leaving Elizabeth an orphan at the age of 2, along with her siblings. She was raised by her governess alongside her sister, Clothilda, and the pair were very different. Elizabeth was considered a proud and passionate child, and she was given a brilliant education befitting her status as a royal princess. She was schooled in history, geography, and other interesting skills, such as botany and religion. In her free time she went for walks in the park, but at some point Elizabeth wished to focus on other things rather than school, and she got to a point where she was not too bothered by her education. But in 1770, her older brother married Marie Antoinette of Austria, and Marie described Elizabeth as delightful and favoured her over her sister. But on the 10th of May 1774, her grandfather died, and her elder brother then became the king. But her sister then left for France the following year, and the sisters tearfully parted. It was said by Marie Antoinette that, "My sister Elizabeth is a charming child, who has much intelligence, character, and grace." She showed the greatest feeling, and much above her age, at the departure of her sister. The poor little girl was in despair, and as her health is very delicate, she was taken ill, and had a very severe nervous attack. I own to my dear mamma that I feel I am getting too attached to her, feeling, from the example of my aunts, how essential it is for her happiness not to remain an old maid in this country. Elizabeth left the children's chamber and became an adult in 1778, and then she was given her own household. There were many attempts to make marriage arrangements for Elizabeth, and she was seen by her brother as someone who could help secure alliances for France. One suggestion was a Prince of Brazil, but then the Duke of Aosta, the future King of Sardinia. But a marriage was then proposed between her and her sister's brother-in-law, Joseph II, the Holy Roman Emperor. He said he was attracted to her, but at court there was some opposition to this, and then no further arrangements were made, despite her only being a very young girl at the time. Elizabeth said, "I can only marry a king's son, and a king's son must reign over his father's kingdom. I should no longer be a Frenchwoman. I do not wish to cease to be one. It is far better to stay here, at the foot of my brother's throne, than to ascend to another." Elizabeth was not seen as an important royal during the French Revolution, and she saw the court as lavish and extravagant, and she actually distanced herself from it. She only attended when it was necessary, and she was certainly smarter than the king and queen. Elizabeth had great respect for her brother, and she did stand by him, but her relationship with Marie Antoinette was mixed. The pair were very different, and Marie found Elizabeth delightful, but Elizabeth was close to her aunts, who were against Marie at court, and they treated her with animosity. Elizabeth would then criticise Marie and her extravagant behaviour, especially as the French people were suffering. She was given land and other houses by the king, and she was given a new house, a place where the king did not allow her to spend nights until she was 24. But whilst here she enjoyed gardening and taking part in many different activities. She even distributed charity to the local villagers, and she did help when she could, having her farm tended to with the locals getting the food and the goods. But as the French Revolution began, Elizabeth refused to leave and emigrate, even after the storming of the Bastille, and she saw the Women's March on Versailles and immediately returned to the palace. She advised her brother the king to repress the riot quickly, but the advice was not accepted. The mob stormed the palace and tried to assassinate the Queen, but Elizabeth then went with the royal family to Paris. She lived with them and was housed beside the Queen on the first floor. But one evening women climbed into her apartment, but Princess Elizabeth did have a good reputation with the public. She was seen different to Marie. She was seen differently to Marie Antoinette, and she would spend her evenings working on tapestries, but she had a better reputation than the Queen. She chose yet again to remain in France, but she did try to escape in June 1791, but the escape plan did fail, and the royal family were then placed under surveillance. But no one was told to guard over Elizabeth, and she was free to leave whenever she wanted, but she chose not to. Elizabeth was seen as different from the King and Queen to begin with, but she knew that something bad would happen to the royal family. The royal court believed there would be an attack on the palace, and she witnessed her brother's dethronement. She was described as calm when this happened, but following the execution of the king, Elizabeth was left with Marie Antoinette in their apartment. When she was moved, Elizabeth asked to stay in contact, but Marie was executed on the 16th of October, 1793. Her last letter she wrote was addressed to Elizabeth, but she never received it. Accusations during her trial were levelled against Elizabeth, but after the overthrow she was not considered dangerous by Robespierre. They intended to banish her from France, but she was accused of having taken part in secret meetings with Marie and then conspiring against the French people. She was said to have sold her diamonds to help fund a war, and also to having arranged a massacre of people during the storming of the palace. Elizabeth knew this was wrong, and she was then taken under arrest and was escorted and held in a single cell. She was refused a public defender and was tried along with 24 other accomplices, including 10 women. During her trial she was accused of being an enemy of the revolution, and following this she was sentenced to death as a sister of the tyrant king. Her death sentence was a little bit unfair, and she was executed on the guillotine. Following her trial, Elizabeth joined the other condemned prisoners inside the Hall of the Condemned, awaiting their execution. She rallied and comforted other condemned people before the executions, and it was said she spoke to them with inexpressible gentleness and calm, dominating their mental suffering by the serenity of her look, the tranquillity of her appearance, and the influence of her words. Elizabeth was to be executed along with 23 men and women who had been tried and condemned at the same time as her. As she approached the guillotine, the white cloth which covered her head was blown off, and she was the only person with a bare head in the procession of the dead. As she reached the foot of the guillotine, there was a bench for the condemned to wait before their execution. Elizabeth left the cart first and made her own way down, but she was then the last to be executed. One woman bowed for her as she went on the gallows. She helped the others through their ordeal, and the last person before her gave her his bow, and she said courage and faith in the mercy of God before it was her turn. As she was summoned to the guillotine, she was strapped quickly on the board, and her shawl fell off and exposed her shoulders, and she said to the executioner, "In the name of your mother, cover me." But as the blade fell on her neck, the execution struck a chord with many of the bystanders. They did not issue a rallying cry in favour of the revolution, and they were respectful. Robespierre himself was concerned about the effect of her death, and it only made people question the reign of terror. Her remains were then buried in a common grave, and they were later disinterred with other victims of the guillotine, and were placed inside the catacombs of Paris. Princess Elisabeth was practically executed for the sole reason, for the fact she was the sister of the king. Many people believe she was a supporter of the royalists, but she was critical of the king and queen throughout her life. She was a dedicated and devoted woman who gave herself to charitable causes and her faith, and she saw the French Revolution as an evil on earth. But it was at the guillotine where she was brutally executed. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.